Hello, Foreign Entanglements viewers. My name is Rob Farley. I'm a lecturer at the Patterson School of Diplomacy and International Commerce at the University of Kentucky. And with me today are you currently in Alabama?
I am currently in Alabama right now, yes.
With me today is Brian Laslie, author of The Air Force Way of War. Right, that's the title, right?
That is correct.
And who is joining us from presumably much warmer Alabama than what is in Kentucky right now.
Yeah, they were complaining about it yesterday. It got down into the 40s yesterday, and people were having a fit about how cold it was.
Mm-hmm. And long-time Foreign Entanglements viewers will recall that Brian joined us a few months ago to talk about his book. So, the weather today in Kentucky is awful. It's snowing, and it's been 5 degrees for the last couple of days, so it's really genuinely terrible. We are here to talk about what really started happening 25 years ago today and a couple days in the past, which is something that you study professionally, which is that we are in the middle of the anniversary of the Desert Storm air campaign, right? The beginning of the Desert Storm air campaign, which you've written about extensively, but some people are talking about now as this is a major anniversary. So I guess, to start off with, what have been your thoughts? What have you been responding to with respect to how this anniversary is being observed, and what happened 25 years ago today?
Well, I think with regard to the response is I almost feel like it's been kind of memorial light, remembrance light. That there hasn't been a whole lot going on. There've been some tweets. The Air Force have put some video out on their website, but there doesn't strike me to be a large outpouring of, as an example, the 40th anniversary, the 50th anniversary of, say, D-Day or some big battle like that. We just haven't seen the same outpouring. And maybe it's because we are only 25 years removed. So maybe, 15 years down the road when we get to a larger anniversary, we'll see more. But primarily it has been talking about things on Twitter and people sharing pictures and telling stories and a little bit of back and forth on there. So for a little bit of context, we are right now, we would be 3 or 4 days into what was the air campaign, which started on 17 January 1991. And so I was going back and looking at this. So it was 5:38 p.m. on the East Coast when the first attacks took place. And then slightly later that CNN broke in and people were watching it. And one of the things I threw out on social media, because this is how people react to this, is where were you? What were you doing?
Right.
Just so a little bit of context, I am entirely too young to really have a lot of memories of this. I was young at the time. I remember being in the car with my parents when they broke into the radio. And then this was kind of the same thing I was getting on social media. A lot of people were in high school, in elementary school, in middle school, what have you. So, there you go.
Right. No, I was 17, and I was intensely interested. Sometimes people ask me, how did you become interested in military affairs, fighter planes, and so forth? And I had a 7-year-old's interest, and I still have a 7-year-old's interest. I've just never lost that. And so I was intensely interested. I remember the second day I brought a Walkman to school, which was strictly forbidden. Right? And so now, with everybody having their cell phones, it's remarkable that there was such control. And I was listening to the war on headphones during class and during library time and so forth.
Yeah, it's funny you say that. That actually someone brought up this week, and I had forgotten these things existed. But back in 1990, 1991, there were Desert Storm trading cards. I assume that Topps put out because they came with bubble gum. And so well before the days of, $2.50 baseball cards like they have now, 50 cents, you got your pack of Desert Storm bubblegum cards, you got your Storm and Norman card, you got your F-117 card, and, kids traded those just like they would baseball stars, which I think says a little bit about the war itself and how we perceived it or perceived of it as something that could be talked about, something that kids could get involved in. And so that was kind of a blast from the past someone brought up this week.
Right. So if we were to look at what the Air Force was in 1991 and what the Air Force looks like today, I mean, what are the sort of the really big differences and what are the really big similarities between how the organization looks now and then?
Organizationally, I think the biggest thing is it is significantly smaller now than it was then. And this is not, I am not. I don't want to go on record as saying the Air Force has been gutted. All military organizations are smaller. It's kind of the inherent state of national security these days. But it was significantly larger, and by that there were more of everything. There were more people, there were more aircraft, more different types of aircraft. This was still right at the brink of the end of the Cold War. So we're within 2 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall. We're within really months of the dissolution of the Soviet Union. So it is still very much a Cold War Air Force built for that purpose. And that's probably the same could be said of all services. Still very much large troop presence in Western Europe, large aircraft presence in Western Europe. In fact, I was looking at pictures today that those were some of the units that responded, sent down to Iraq, were actually F-16 units from Europe, which we tend not to try to do. That is move from one theater to another. But there you have it. So really, I think the big thing is it is still very much a Cold War Air Force in 1991, focused very much on that Cold War mission. Now, is kind of an interesting observance is the same could be said of the Iraqis. It's still very much built on a Soviet style of warfare, right. Soviet aircraft. And there's a lot that goes back and forth after the war as to whose fault is it that Iraq did so poorly. Was it Russia's fault, or was it France's fault? Because those are the two big suppliers for Iraq's Air Force, Iraq's air defense system, Soviet Union, Russia, and France.
Mm-hmm. Right, and so a lot of and I'm trying to remember when did the F-15 and F-16 lines stop? And so obviously there are a lot of aircraft that sort of literally served in Desert Storm that are still serving today, right? In terms of the B-52s and some of the others. When did we stop producing F-15s and F-16s? Right? Are most of the planes in the inventory today still planes that could have or did serve in 1991?
Yeah, it would be easier to look at aircraft that were not in Desert Storm. So you could start your short list with, F-22, F-35, the production had not started on those yet. And then it's kind of a bridge because there's still very much some Vietnam aircraft that are flying. There are F-4 units that are deployed. There are F-111 units that are deployed. But to answer your question about the F-15 and F-16 production lines, from a certain point of view, those lines have really never stopped. Obviously, we still produce them for the Saudi Arabia, for Israel. There are still countries that buy, for lack of a better term, brand new F-15s and F-16s fresh off the production line. But the F-15s that flew in, kind of the air-to-air killers that flew during Desert Storm were not old. I mean, the production line had only started in 1975 with the F-15A. And so all of these aircraft that are flying, in fact, I was looking at the tail numbers the last couple of days. Those are all mid to late 80s tail numbers that were the MiG killers from Desert Storm.
Right. And how many... 1991 is also, I don't know if it's exactly the last air-to-air kill, but it's most of the more recent air-to-air kills. And I can't remember how many air-to-air kills were there in 2003. I don't have a recollection, but
2003 none. You would have to go back to 1999. To Allied force, there were less than 10. I'll say that air-to-air kills. In fact, there's an F-15 pilot who had 2 air-to-air kills in Desert Storm, and he had 1 in Allied force. So for a grand total of 3. And the Atlantic did an article on him a couple of years ago called "The Last Ace." I know you're supposed to have 5 kills for ace status, but he got 3, and that's about as close as you're going to get these days.
Right. And are there still some of the people who have kills from 1991? Are any of them still in the Air Force?
Yeah, there are a few, not only in the Air Force, but in the Navy. In fact, the deputy commander at CENTCOM had an air-to-air kill during Desert Storm. But they're still floating around, onesies, twosies, really. Many of them have gone on to do other things. Not surprisingly, there's some that work for Lockheed Martin or Raytheon or BAE or what have you.
Right. Now, one thing we forget about 1991 is that, it was a genuine coalition effort, right? And so the United States was was certainly managing things, but who were the other really big contributors to this? Now that we're in the midst of another big coalition campaign, but who were the other really big contributors to the campaign?
So, 39 countries participated, 26 to 28 countries sent troops. So it was, you say but it was big. I mean, there were several participants, and of course, as most people know, this was the thing with trying to keep Israel out of the war, because you had the Arab State coalition, you had Egypt, you had Jordan. In fact, if I'm not mistaken, you had Syria participated as well.
But we didn't have Jordan. I think actually Jordan was the one that was, because there was a lot of trouble with the Palestinian population. So I think to my recollection, the Jordanians were the odd man out. They
were the holdout.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And the Syrians were involved, though, I think.
Yeah, Syria did participate in that. So you had 425,000 American troops, U.S. troops. You threw almost another 200,000 coalition troops on top of that. So you had the old line allies, I guess you'd say, the British, the French. But the really amazing thing about Desert Storm were the number of coalition partners from the Gulf states that participated heavily. And then going back to talking about the F-15s and air-to-air kills, besides the American Air Force and the United States Navy, there was a Royal Saudi pilot who had 2 air-to-air kills as well.
Right. To my recollection, there's an interesting story. I mean, I've heard from some people that American pilots sort of set him up for that victory, but of course that's what Americans would say. So, do you know anything about the story?
It's kind of like with any air-to-air engagement, kind of right place at the right time. So he was very much in the right place at the right time as the 2 Iraqis were coming at him. And this is the great thing about technology today is I got curious about this engagement, and so I did what any red-blooded American would do. I looked it up on YouTube, and his HUD kill is on there.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So
you can't get a lot of the American HUD footage still classified, but that particular one was released, and you can listen to him as he shoots down. And in fact, you can see the missiles come off the rail and everything.
We'll have to have a link to that. What did he kill? What were the planes that he killed?
I don't think they were MiGs. In fact, I was thinking you were going to ask me things like this morning. I don't think they were MiGs. They might have been French Mirages, but I'm not going to go on record as saying what they were.
Right.
I simply don't remember.
Right. So, I mean, do you think that some of the muted memory of this time is because while Desert Storm seemed very finished at the time, it's not right now. I mean, the basic problems that erupted around Desert Storm are still in many ways afflicting us and afflicting the Air Force. And I know we talked a little bit about this, but I've seen the observation online that the Air Force has been over Iraq for over a third of its entire history, right? In some sense, this is the biggest and longest war that the Air Force has ever waged.
Yeah, when I was in at Al Udeid Air Base, Qatar, a couple of years ago, in 2011, as we were pulling out of Iraq in the fall of 2011, this was kind of the argument that had been made that since January 17th, 1991, the Air Force had not left the theater. They had been flying, basically around the clock, some type of mission, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And that was kind of celebrated in 2011 as, hey, we're done. We moved out. We're going to do other things. We're not leaving the region, but we won't be flying active sorties, kind of in and around Iraq. And so that was a big deal. And so the Air Force's perception has been that they've never left the region, that in some sense of the term, they've always been flying combat operations. And so, of course, Desert Storm gives way to Northern Watch, to Southern Watch. You have Desert Fox, a few more oddball operations in there. But the Air Force does have a valid point that they have been flying missions, almost 25 years straight in the region.
Mm-hmm. Right. And there doesn't seem to be any indication they're going to stop flying missions in the region anytime soon.
No, not for the foreseeable future. Let's say the degrading and destructing will carry on for, I would guess, at least another few years.
Right. How much of the air campaign against ISIS is happening in Iraq, and how much is happening in Syria? I mean, I don't need just sort of big, clear numbers, but what is your sense of the magnitude that's happening on either side of the border?
This is something that comes up a lot, and I don't want to get into a political conversation about should we do more, should there be boots on the ground, should we move into Iraq, should we move into Syria?
Hmm.
Look, I'll let the pundits and the policymakers handle that. But there are airstrikes that are going on, in kind of a confined region.
Hmm.
And we are doing, not we, the United States military is doing everything it can to attack ISIS.
Hmm.
Short of a much larger and extended campaign, which me nor a lot of other people are very much interested in at this point.
Hmm. Right.
I think maybe this is, you talked about the muted celebration for Desert Storm, and maybe this is why it has been muted. Is now it doesn't seem that there has been an end since 1991. There, like I said, Northern and Southern Watch, we were there. There was the 2003 invasion. We've been there until 2011. Now we're back. And so maybe the muted celebration over 25 years ago is this, trying to decide who are we, what have we accomplished, did we finish the mission? Certainly since 2003, should we have done that in the first place?
Right.
And so that there's not this celebratory aspect to Desert Storm that maybe you could have even found 10 or 15 years ago.
Right. So, of course, we're not the only ones conducting an air campaign in the region right now. How would you explain to sort of a lay audience what are the major differences, both points of similarity and points of difference between the air campaign that the United States and its coalition partners are conducting and the air campaign that the Russians are conducting in Syria?
I think the big thing is that for the United States and for our allies in the region, this is something that we're very good at. And we're very good at it because we have been doing it for so long, and we've had so much time to perfect what we do. So as technology has advanced, as we've gotten more precise weapons, as we've gotten, JDAMs whose circular error probable, we're talking within a few feet.
Can you explain that? I know what you mean.
Joint direct attack munition. So
and circular error. And circular error.
Oh, all right, and circular error. So JDAM, joint direct attack munition. A GPS guided bomb coming off the rails of an aircraft, and then circular error probable, which when that bomb does come off the aircraft, how close to its target is it going to hit? So when you look at World War II, you're talking, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, 2 miles away from the target, maybe 50% of the bombs will land in that circle.
Mm-hmm.
And then as technology has advanced to now where we're talking, the circular error probable within a few feet of where you aim it. Again, that's a technology driven GPS guided munition. But we're very good at it. And it's not just because we've had combat in Iraq in 91, combat in Iraq in 03, Allied force in the Balkans, in Afghanistan since 2001. But this is something that we have trained at. And again, something we talked about the last time we talked was, we have large force exercises on a fairly regular basis for air crews to go through and train and kind of get in that pressure cooker of combat. So we as an American military, our British, our French allies, our German allies, our Gulf coalition partners who participate in these training exercises.
Just to pause you for a second. Did you see the report about the software and the German tornadoes not allowing to fly at night?
Yeah, because it's entirely too bright inside the cockpit.
Right.
And I remember thinking that, and I don't know what the exact glitch is that they're working on, but I remember that, some of the in-theater fixes during Vietnam, you had pilots going and getting rearview mirrors out of cars to stick into the aircraft so they could see backwards.
Right.
They take ballpoint pins and stick them onto the switches so they'd have to not reach as far. And so if the light's entirely too bright, I thought look, maybe it's a sticky note or something you could stick over it rather than having to go back for a whole computer fix. But yeah, I did see that and chuckled at it a little bit. All right, where were we?
Oh, we were talking about big exercises.
So the differences between us and the Russians. The Air Force, the U.S. Navy, very technology focused. And again, I've tried to take the focus off the technology and talk about the people. But it's very much that melding of technology and people that go together in the training environment and the real combat situations, to the point that we are very good at what we do. And to the point that we are not willing to take on excessive civilian casualties. Why? Because we have that option. And I don't think that you were seeing the same thing with the Russian campaign. And one of the reasons is they don't have uh, a red flag equivalent. They don't have a weapons school equivalent. Yeah, and I know people put in the comments that, oh, yeah, they have a weapons school, that they conduct exercises. But it's not to the level that the American weapons schools, the other countries in the coalition, that they have practiced and trained to do this. So, I think the bottom line, and, let's hope some KGB agent doesn't come out of the woods to kill me. They're not as good as we are. They haven't had as much practice as we have. They don't train as much as we do. And the bottom line, they seem to be willing to accept more civilian casualties than we ever would. And they also have not had that technological advancement. So, if you put a stop on production in 1990, 1991 with the collapse of the Soviet Union, they're 20 years behind. They are just now getting a fifth generation aircraft into the sky. And, I'm still, a long way from convinced that they're going to be able to pull this off. In fact, someone was talking this morning on social media that now the Russians get to figure out how hard fifth generation technology is to produce and operate. Right. So, they're not as good. They're not as well trained. And they are more willing to accept casualties and civilian casualties. And I also think that, it just seems apparent, when you look at the shoot down with Turkey, they just seem less willing to want to work with everyone else.
Right. And we should expect, and part of that maybe I suspect is, there's a temperamental aspect to it. There's an organizational aspect to it, but there's also a big political, right? I mean, they and the Turks have genuinely different views on who ought to win this war in Syria. But I mean, we should also expect them to be learning, right? I mean, this is really, I don't recall, I haven't read that much about Russian air operations in Chechnya, but they were not well regarded in Georgia. And so, I mean, really, this is one of the first, and this has gone on much longer than even the Georgia war went on, right? And so, I mean, this is kind of a learning experience for their Air Force too, right? I mean, it's a real live fire red flag in a sense.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is a campaign. When you look at the post-Vietnam U.S. Air Force, there were several operations, smaller operations, in a sense to kind of get our feet back under us. So you look at Grenada, you look at Panama, you look at El Dorado Canyon in Libya in the mid 1980s, and so there were kind of this escalation of getting the tactical force fixed again, being able to conduct large scale operations that went along with these the training exercises, the red flags, and what have you. I absolutely think that's what the Russians are doing here. They're getting their feet back under them. They are learning how to conduct sustained large scale operations again.
Right. To then sidestep, one of the, and I know we've talked a little bit about this before, and it is a topic that has been done to death. But the recent announcement, which has stemmed from the usage of the A-10 in this particular conflict, is that the Air Force is once again backing away from an accelerated retirement of the A-10. I mean, do you have any thoughts on that? Or, I mean, was this kind of expected? I mean, the political support for the A-10, I mean, they seem to run into pretty much a wall of political support for the A-10.
Yeah, I don't want to say it was either expected or unexpected. I honestly could have seen it going either way. And again, it's really easy to get dragged down into policy debates about you've only got a certain amount of money, and what are you going to spend that money on? You've only got a certain amount of people, so you've got maintainers that you need to work on the F-35, and so where do you get these maintainers? Well, they've got to come from somewhere, so you get them from the A-10, and now you can't fly the A-10 as often, and so I completely understand kind of the Air Force's point of view. But it always has been a very unique aircraft, the A-10. It has a very particular mission and subset, and that is that close air support tank destroying mission, which I think it has found again a value use for in Iraq and Syria. But one thing I don't want to overlook, and I think this happens all too often, is that there are other aircraft that do that mission. They don't do it as uniquely well. They're not attack aircraft as the A-10 is kind of monikered there. But the F-35, or not the F-35, not yet. We'll get there one of these days. Uh, uh, Freudian slip. The F-15E, the Strike Eagle that can do that. The variants of the F-16. And then, look, let's be honest, in Afghanistan in the last 10 or 15 years, using the B-1 is a close air support show of force aircraft. And again, that is a melding of technology. So
Yeah, I think that we both observed how fascinating and ironic, strange it was that the B-1Bs and Tu-160s were flying together, not wing to wing, but they were both conducting these operations in Syria at the same time against what amounted to small insurgent groups, right? These
Yeah, and so
supersonic bombers.
you've got two supersonic bombers from basically the two rival countries, us and Russia, that are designed to fly at extremely high speed, extremely low altitude, fly in, deliver their nukes, and hopefully get out. And here you are in this weird world we live in now, where both of these aircraft are delivering very precise munitions onto very small targets. In this counterinsurgency, guerrilla style, irregular warfare, whatever phrase you want to use, and something that they were never designed for.
Right.
But this is not unusual. The F-16 is initially built as a low cost, lightweight variant to the F-15, so you could build more of them. And it could be, your high-low mix, and really it ended up being this kind of this high mix, because the F-16 can do so much. It can do air-to-ground, it can do air-to-air. It is it can do it all.
So you talked a little bit about the experience that the Air Force has gained and how the Air Force and the Navy, we shouldn't set them out, and even the Marine Corps is involved in this campaign, has gained in all of this time in Iraq. But it is a very specific kind of experience, right? I mean, what we've been doing here is not sort of preparing for high-intensity air-to-air, air superiority combat, right? Or even something that we did do in 2003, which is, suppression of enemy air defenses, right? And that could happen in Syria at some point. In your experience or to your knowledge, do the exercises that the Air Force and the Navy and the training that they do now, is it designed to facilitate what they are doing now, or is it designed to fill the gaps that are being left by this particular kind of campaign?
No, the answer is yes. To both, really. You still have large scale exercises across the service that are meant to teach, what I would call the bread and butter of the American military, which is major combat operations against a peer or near peer enemy. So you're still preparing for that fight should it emerge. But all of the services have obviously realized over the last 10 or 15 years, or really, go back to 1999 and Allied Force of the Balkan campaigns before that, the conflict of the future is going to be smaller, is going to be irregular, it is going to be unconventional. And so they have modified certain training events for those environments. So you have red flags that are more geared toward the irregular warfare that we've seen in Afghanistan and Syria and the like. So it's it's great that you have a military presence that has that ability to kind of scale down, if you will, almost the building blocks in reverse, and go from being able to do the major combat operations to something smaller. And one thing you hit on that I wanted to touch on, and this goes back to Desert Storm, and the more I study these different campaigns, so if you go forward from Desert Storm to Allied Force to Enduring Freedom to Iraqi Freedom to what are we on, Inherent Resolve
Inherent
now?
Resolve, I think is
where we are. Is that everything is unique, and I know that you can make the argument, well, if everything's unique, nothing's unique, and it's all the same. But each of these conflicts comes at a particular time and place under a particular set of circumstances, fenced into a particular construct and context. And so when you look at Desert Storm, it is very much major combat operations, peer on near peer. And I think that's something that tends to get lost is, when you look at what we thought was going to happen prior to the execution of Desert Storm, is not what happened. But you ended up having, for lack of a better term, a very compliant enemy who was willing to, if not completely roll over, did not put up the kind of fight we thought he was going to.
Relatively modern equipment, right? I mean, not quite to the state of the art, but relatively modern equipment.
Well, he was flying MiG-29s, which were, look, that is the F-15 equivalent, modern, very capable fighter. Again, the difference is our pilots were just so much better trained than his were, and of course his relied on that Soviet model of integrated air defense system. So the Iraqi pilot is supposed to have a guy on the ground talking to him, telling him where to go and what to do.
Right.
And when you remove that piece of the puzzle, he's effectively up there, being F-15 fodder.
Right.
But a very compliant enemy in 1991, in a war that, essentially we can say, we went in, we did what we wanted to accomplish, and we got out. And I think that we are still 25 years later, still kind of coming to terms with that. In that my generation and the generation right before me and right after me, maybe has come to believe that major combat operations were something that we could go in, we could do, we could get out, it could be over. The war was paid for because, we convinced all of the coalition countries. It is a very, very unique conflict, Desert Storm is. And I think that and then 2003, when we went back into Iraq, and from a certain point of view, it was even easier than 1991 was. A very compliant enemy, an enemy that did not think that we were going to come in the way that we did. And I think that from a sense, it is our Vietnam, in that it kind of warped our view, me and several others, of what conflict was supposed to look like. Right. And this is the age-old story for the United States Air Force. Is you look at the enormous success of 1991, cheap, neat, easy, faster than a conventional land campaign. And the air, look, I mean, there's no doubt that air power contributed enormously to Desert Storm, but it also shaped kind of the Air Force's vision. 91 was almost this vindication of Douay and Billy Mitchell, and look, see, we told you we can really do.
Which is really very strange, right? Because those are bomber guys, and the Air Force was still run by the fighter generals in 1991.
Oh yeah, there's no doubt. In fact, I was kind of raising a point on social media this week that the Air Force put out about a super secret B-52 mission, almost as if to say, look, SAC participated in 1991, and Global Strike can participate in what we do now. But very much 1991 was a tactical air command opera. I mean, it was tactical fighters, EF-111s, F-111s, F-4s, F-15s, F-16s. Now, in fairness, who did the Iraqi soldier in Kuwait fear? Well, he feared the B-52, but of course, that only comes after our defenses have been suppressed or destroyed. Right. But 91, very much a tactical style of warfare for the United States Air Force. And so you're right that they kind of took the bomber mafia and kind of turned it on its head. Right. Because now you had, we can do all of these strategic attacks, but we can do them with fighters. But I think the principle of the matter was that the Air Force once again had the opportunity to say, we can do this cheap, neat, easier. And I think that nightmare has kind of followed the Air Force. Now that you look at the fight against ISIS, the Air Force, the Navy, the Marines, all of the air components, they're doing what they need to do. They're interdicting ISIS. They're keeping them, as effectively boxed into where they are. They are degrading them, and now, in my perspective, it's more of a waiting game than it is anything else. And, recent news articles have shown that there's starting to be the fractures and the frictions inside of ISIS.
Right. And the Iraqi forces are beginning to coalesce, right? They appear to be, able to undertake. And I pause it because I want to ask another question. So, we've talked a lot about the outcome for the U.S. Air Force, right? I mean, there was another Air Force participating here, was the Iraqis, right? The Iraqi Air Force is mostly destroyed, not entirely, but mostly destroyed in 1991. Completely destroyed in 2003. What's going on right now with the Iraqi Air Force, right? I mean, I know they're finally getting their F-16s. I don't know if any of them are actually on station.
They're training. Their pilots are training here in the United States, learning to fly the F-16s, which is it's a I don't want to say a mental challenge. Maybe cognitive dissonance is the better term for someone like myself to think of the Iraqi Air Force as flying F-16s now. Right. American-made F-16s. And this is interesting because, you talk about them being destroyed. And so they have 44 air-to-air kills, or we have 44 air-to-air kills against them. We destroy 100 of their aircraft on the ground, and then somewhere in the neighborhood of 100 to 150 of their aircraft flee to Iran shortly after the air campaign begins. And then what's left of that Air Force is destroyed less than a decade later during Iraqi freedom. And so we're almost a victim of our own success in that we have kind of turned this country on its head, and now it's up to us to rebuild their military structure really from the ground up. And I don't know if if they've received any of their F-16s yet. I would think they probably have at this point.
But I think I did read that they have. But
I know that their pilots are training here in the United States, learning to fly the F-16.
No, if I recollect, I mean they had. I mean, there were some weird reports about them acquiring some Frogfoot aircraft from Iran or from Russia, and there were also these reports of them flying civilian aircraft, Iraqi pilots flying what were mainly either training or civilian aircraft and flying sorties against ISIS with those.
It's probably a mixed bag at this point. It's funny when I go back and look at the pre World War II generation, and you look at the smattering of aircraft that the United States had. So things that never came to fruition: B-9s, B-10s, P-35s, P-36s. And so it was not unusual to walk out onto a ramp, say here somewhere like Maxwell Field, and you've got a dozen different types of aircraft sitting out on the ramp, and these guys, okay, well, I got to fly somewhere. I'm just going to go grab whatever's sitting out here on the ramp. As opposed to today, you go to an American base, and they're going to have probably a single type of aircraft. You've got your bigger composite bases where they've got a few things, but if you go to Langley Air Force Base, they've got F-22 sitting there. If you go to Luke, they've got F-16 sitting there, and but I think this is probably where you are, kind of the Wild West of the rebirth of the Iraqi Air Force, is that you could walk out on any given ramp and really who knows what you're going to run into out there.
Well, Brian, I mean, do you have anything else to say? I think it's been a wonderful conversation on this 25th anniversary. So.
Yeah, no, I don't really have anything to add. I think it's always good to take these anniversaries, these 10, these 20, these 25 years, and kind of think back at who we were then, who we are now, and it allows us to ask the big esoteric questions of where are we going and kind of what's next.
Right. No, it's a time for all kinds of different reflection, right? And here we've talked about sort of tactical and organizational, right? But it's also a time for strategic reflection. I know that a lot of people have begun, asking this question, right? I mean, was this decision in 1991, which was celebrated and lauded, to engage in this conflict, is this something that fundamentally put us down a path that was just not a direction we should go?
Well, I think if I could have 30 seconds to say so, one of the things I've said previously is that, and we didn't even mention this, how can you talk Desert Storm without mentioning the F-117? So the first generation of stealth fighters, really an attack/bomber aircraft, really particular niche mission. But that is one of the things that's really lauded and celebrated by the Air Force after Desert Storm, is how much the F-117 contributed to the destruction of the Iraqi infrastructure, the John Warden's rings that we kind of used to attack Iraq. And I've said that the Air Force after Desert Storm kind of bet on black, and that everything was going to be low observable stealth technology after that. And it did. It very much set us down a path of F-117, F-22, F-35, which leads us directly into the debates we have today. Do we need low observable fifth generation, high impact major combat operation Air Force at the same time that we're struggling with, what do we do with the A-10? Very much the vestige of the Vietnam close air support aircraft. So yeah, these are questions that I don't think are really ever decided. We just kind of have to change the conversation as we go along.
All right. Well, thank you, and for all the viewers of Foreign Entanglements, thank you for watching.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I appreciate it.